Welcome everybody to our presentation, Seeking Immortality, Preserving Native American Language and Cultural Artifacts of the Northern Cheyenne in Virtual Reality. My name is Anthony Chow. I'm the Director of the School of Information at San Jose State and also co-PI on this grant. Dara?
Hi, I'm Dara Hoffman. I'm an assistant professor at San Jose State University's iSchool, as well as the coordinator for the Master of Archives and Records Administration and co-PI on this grant, and I am a settler on Treaty 8 land.
And then Adrienne Violet is the Wooden Legs Library Director. She's not with us. See Alfredo?
Hello, everyone. I'm Alfredo Alcantar, and I'm the coordinator of the Library Technology Integration Lab here at the iSchool.
And then Cole Higgins is our VR consultant, and you'll be hearing from him in just a little bit. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Lyons. I'm an IMLS student at San Jose State University, and I'm one of the project managers for Seeking Immortality.
Thank you, Anna. Michelle?
Hi, my name's Michelle Atwater, and I'm also an MLIS candidate and working as an assistant in user experience.
Thank you. And Chuck Carter is also one of our VR consultants, and he'll be joining us later on the presentation as well.
Before we get too deep into this talk, we want to take just a moment to acknowledge that this year's WLA is happening in Spokane, and that Spokane is the traditional homeland of the 4 bands of the Spokane tribe of Indians, the Snatut Uliu, the Snehwamene, the Tekeskilhine, and the Shewile, the upper band, middle band, lower band, and Tuela band. Since time immemorial, the Spokane tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as Gele, or flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of the Spokane tribe and to all those who stand upon this land. Let me also take just a moment to remind everyone, land acknowledgements are not the same as land back. There's much work to be done so that these kinds of acknowledgements are not merely performative. And while today we gather on Spokane lands, the work that we're going to be talking about has been done largely on Northern Cheyenne lands, although much of the work that we've done at SJSU is on the traditional lands of the Muwekwa Ohlone, and I myself live on Treaty 8 lands in Canada. So there is a really rich tapestry of peoples to acknowledge, of nations to acknowledge in this work.
For the agenda today, we're going to have a project overview. We're going to go over the Northern Cheyenne tribe, the goals of the project, and we're going to have a VR demonstration. Next slide. For our project overview, our formal partnership between the Northern Cheyenne Tribe Council, Chief Dull-Knife College Cultural Affairs staff, and the Wooden Legs Library, the San Jose State iSchool, San Jose State Martin Luther King Jr. Library. The project goals, as funded by the IMLS funded Native Enhancement Grant, the digitization and preservation of the Northern Cheyenne tribe language and culture, starting with the Burns collection, training and capacity building, information security and privacy, and a tour of the VR museum and library. The Northern Cheyenne tribe is in southeastern Montana. The reservation has 444,000 acres with 99% tribal ownership. And of the over 12,000 enrolled tribal members, there are less than 300 people who fluently speak the Cheyenne language. Chief Dull College is in Lame Deer, Montana, and its curriculum reflects the tribe's cultural pride and heritage with classes in Cheyenne, oral traditions, Plains Indian Sign Language, drumming, and singing.
You're right there.
Well, we in the information professions have a long history of preserving tangible heritage from a settler colonist perspective. A large portion of all cultures and heritages, including the Northern Cheyenne tribe's heritage, is intangible. Everything from songs and dances to protocols controlling the access to said heritage. So part of undoing the legacy of colonialism, which has disrupted the transmission of culture, is that putting in place systems that can help to preserve that heritage, including capturing the stories, the knowledge, the language from those surviving elders, especially first language elders, so that the heritage can be transmitted to the rightful inheritors of that heritage, the Northern Cheyenne tribes, children, young adults, youth, and younger members of the tribe. So one of the first collections that we'll be working on is the Burns collection in terms of tangible heritage. So the Burns collection was collected by George Dempsey and Annie Burns, who ran and owned the Lazy EY Ranch Motel just outside of Lame Deer, which is the main city on the Northern Cheyenne Tribe Reservation. And they had collected a large collection of items pertaining to the Northern Cheyenne culture. And this collection, of which you can see pictures at the bottom, has approximately 80 items and numerous artifacts specific to the Northern Cheyenne, as well as other non-Northern Cheyenne artifacts relevant to the area. And as you can see, there's a lot of conservation work to be done to help ensure that these artifacts are preserved and accessible for as long as they're needed.
The creative vision of Seeking Immortality is guided by a data-driven user task matrix that is generated from multiple focus group sessions and on-site visits that help to identify the articulated needs and goals of different user groups. So this shows how the digital archive and virtual museum can meet these needs. The matrix is comprised of 4 main user groups, which are tribal members, tribal educators, the Seeking Immortality team, and the tribal library. Each stakeholder group has various tasks and goals that can be supported throughout the lifespan of the project's design, development, and implementation with ongoing iterations, while also maintaining important data sovereignty by the Northern Cheyenne tribe. For example, tribal elders can use the digital archive to record and share their unique stories and wisdom with current and future generations. Therefore, the Northern Cheyenne can access the virtual museum to revisit their ancestral lands and sacred sites, teach each other about their rich cultural heritage and identity, and even connect with other tribal members who might not currently reside on the reservation. They can also utilize this immersive space to explore their culture in an interactive and engaging way. Tribal youth can access the digital archive to discover and connect with their roots and heritage to further develop a sense of pride and belonging. They can also use the virtual space to interact with their elders and peers and to express their own creativity and aspirations. As well, non-tribal visitors can access the digital archive to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of the Northern Cheyenne culture and history, and to respect their diversity and sovereignty. They can also utilize the space to experience the Northern Cheyenne culture from a first-person perspective and to learn from virtual avatars who act as interactive guides and mentors. So basically, the Seeking Immortality project is not only about conserving the present, but also about creating the future. By incorporating digital preservation technology and establishing implementation protocols, this initiative empowers the Northern Cheyenne community to continue to control their cultural heritage and to share it with others in very meaningful ways. The Conservation and Preservation Project also fosters collaboration and communication among various stakeholders to create innovative solutions that honor Indigenous knowledge, systems, and values. So in general, the main goals of the Seeking Immortality project collectively aim to create a digital archive of the Northern Cheyenne cultural heritage materials, which include oral histories, narratives, heirlooms, and important tribal cultural belongings, as well as intangible heritage. This initiative also strives to create a unifying and welcoming space that showcases these materials in an interactive and immersive virtual reality environment with custom avatars. So Seeking Immortality is based on the premise that culture is not static, but dynamic and evolving to include aspects of the past, the present, and the future. Therefore, the Seeking Immortality project allows for continuous addition and modification of the digital collection, creating an inclusive ecosystem that welcomes all parts of the Northern Cheyenne culture and community.
I just wanted to also mention before we go on to the next area is that UX is critically important, because when designing a digital space, we have to take into account the different types of users that will be experiencing and seeking information in that space. So as Michelle showed, one of the things we've worked very hard to do is to understand the context and perceptions and priorities of the Northern Cheyenne people. I will have to say that in talking with them, they shifted our paradigm as far as how we were approaching it versus how they approach information. And so I'm very proud of the work that Michelle has done and team, and really digging deeper into understanding their information priorities. I'm going to introduce Alfredo Alcantar, who I've asked to join us as the coordinator for our Library Technology Integration Lab. And the next series of slides are really going to look at the project in 3 different phases. The first one will be the technology that we're using and the training needed to digitally preserve language, people, stories, and culture. Then it'll be followed by Dr. Hoffman, who will be talking about information priority and data sovereignty and all of the various aspects necessary in the preservation process. And then finally, a full tour of our initial virtual reality space. So with that being said, let me hand it over to Alfredo.
Thanks, Dr. Chow. So we at the lab are thrilled to be part of this project, documenting the wisdom of elders, capturing invaluable skills, digitizing or helping digitize their precious artifacts, and then working with the team there to refine the process to make it as user-friendly and easy to replicate as possible. So again, our lab is fully committed to working with Adrian, the tribal librarian and director of the Wooden Legs Library, and their team to provide technical support, to provide resources for them, tailor personal guidance to kind of ensure that the Northern Cheyenne tribe's heritage lives on in this project. So next slide. We are right now assembling and testing out the technology that is there on site, and also we're acquiring stuff here at the lab so that we can maximize our time while we're not on site to kind of test and work out any kinks. So we've put together the lab a list of technologies that we'll be using to make this happen. Now, this inventory is a living, breathing entity, so we're going to keep refining it as we go. But feel free to scan the QR code and take a look at the list that we have. At the end of the project, we should have a nice comprehensive list and guide to kind of explain from start to finish on kind of how to capture and digitize items. So the next slide we're going to look at, we'll go to the next one, is our setup. Right now, we're at the lab, and our main goal is to make everything really user-friendly and easy. So you'll see here on site, they have an iPad. So we're recording and setting up in a simple fashion with just a tripod, iPad, and a lighting. So the iPad Pro is mounted to a tripod, and the audio that we're going to be using or the microphones that we're using to capture are Rode mics and wireless ones, lavalier mics, and that we're going to test and take with us on site to use when we're recording elders. You see here, simple setup, the receiver it sticks onto the mic, sticks onto the iPad, and also we adhere it to the subject. And in the guide that we also have, and I'll be sharing a little bit later, is we have a field producing guide that we're putting together that'll kind of explain this into more detail, but I just want to give you kind of a look of what we're doing here. This is a real simple ring light, easy and affordable, but we also have purchased and mimicking the setup that they have out in Montana, and this is the setup they have here. So we'll be also replicating that in the lab. Again, all of it is to work out the kinks and make sure that everything works out smoothly, so that when we go and work with the team and train, we make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And if we do have to do anything and troubleshoot here at the lab, we'll have the same equipment that they have to help remotely, so they don't feel stranded or lost. Next slide is going to cover, excuse me, is the field producers guide that I was mentioning. So again, feel free to scan that. This here is a living document as well. And so as we go through it, we'll edit and make changes and, and streamline the process to be, again, as user-friendly and as easy as possible. We are on top of using the iPad. The next phase is to work on recording with a DSLR camera. And so that is to two things. We're using the iPad and the camera, one, to stay kind of budget friendly, so that if we want to scale this and someone wants to replicate, we're not using stuff that's not attainable. We want to maintain a low profile in this setup. And again, ease of use is kind of what is kind of our mantra here at the lab when putting this together. So once we've finished recording an elder or recording one-on-one or recording an actual skill, the next thing that we want to do, and we'll show in the next slide, is we want to, and this is, we haven't here at the lab yet explored it. We're going to be working and collaborating with the Clever Lab on campus to learn how to digitize artifacts in a simple way. So they do have a machine to scan artifacts on site, but it's a little complicated. And not that we can't figure it out, but ease of use is, again, what we want. So if we go on to the next slide, we haven't yet settled on which application that we're going to be using to scan, but we are testing a few of them out. So if you look here in the upper right-hand corner, one of the things where we want to capture is nonverbal movement. So we're learning and we're figuring out how to kind of break this into bite-sized pieces to be able to train and to kind of make it easy to use. On the bottom left-hand side is an application, not one yet that we've settled on, but it gives you a taste of kind of what it's like. So using your smartphone, in our case, it's an iOS device, it's just pointing at the objects, scanning it, and then having a file at the very end. So oversimplifying it, but that's our goal, is to kind of find something that is easy and also meets what exactly we need to then use these artifacts or these scanned items to then put them into a VR space if they are, if we are so lucky to kind of share what we've scanned out into our VR space. Now, once we've done all of that, we've recorded, we've scanned, then we need to kind of back up everything, right? So on the next slide, it's a simple slide. It's tossing it up to Dara's piece that'll go a little bit more into detail on this, but we're following the 3-2-1 rule. And that, again, to the process of the naming and the documenting and the archiving will also be laid out. And at the very end of this project, we'll have kind of a nice package to deliver. But one, we want to maintain 3 copies of the data. You want to keep 2 separate formats and at least store 1 off-site. So that's where we are going to end here at the lab in our cycle, but everything else in between is going to probably take some time to kind of work out and refine. But again, we're excited to be brought in on this project and hopefully do justice to the overall goal and of this project. So I thank you, and I pass it off to Dara.
Thank you so much, Alfredo. So as Alfredo pointed out, information security, the 3-2-1 rule is one of your most basic information security rules, has been a central part of this project from the beginning because, of course, colonial institutions, settler institutions are chock full of stolen heritage that has been taken from various indigenous communities, including the Northern Cheyenne. And so from the beginning, we've been taking kind of this information governance approach, and information governance is this approach to information that looks at it as this asset that needs to be managed strategically. And as you can see from the information governance reference model here, this is primarily the model that's used in, for example, corporate environments, records and information management. It tries to integrate information technology, security, privacy, risk, legal, RIM, which is records and information management, and business. So it's not the most appropriate model, of course, because it's based in, again, that very kind of corporate strategic mindset. But there has been a lot of work done by a number of indigenous scholars and organizations to push for data and information governance that protects information sovereignty and digital sovereignty for information for indigenous communities. And it's important to note that, various indigenous native communities are sovereign nations. They have their own distinct cultures. It is very hard to talk about anything as being sort of pan-native or pan-indigenous, just like you wouldn't talk about, the French and the English as like pan-European when you're talking about culture, including their cultures of archives, right? And so a couple of the sort of principles that have emerged, FAIR actually comes from the scientific data community. And that's this idea that our data needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which means that you have to have really just robust description. You have to have excellent metadata so you know where everything is, so that it's in a format that can be accessed, because there is nothing more frustrating than having a file that you want to use, and because of obsolescence, the format is no longer accessible. The worst. Interoperable, because the more interoperable things are, the easier they are to preserve and to ensure that they remain accessible for long term. And same for reusable. It costs a lot of time and energy to collect any sort of digital object. You just heard Alfredo talk about the many steps that will be involved just in getting the recording set up, and then the preservation work. So we want things to be reusable. And so that comes from the scientific data world. But from the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, we also have CARE, which is that this idea that our data and our digital objects, well, not ours, but data and digital objects collected about indigenous people should serve the collective benefit of the people, that there should be indigenous control of indigenous information and data. And this is something that historically has very much not been the case. Historically, indigenous native peoples have been highly overdocumented in deeply negative and non-representative ways, primarily by settler researchers and settler institutions. In Canada, the First Nations Information Governance group also talks about, the similar principles that they call OCAP, ownership, control, access and privacy, I think. But the idea is fundamentally that the people about whom the data is should be the people who have authority to control it. To borrow an expression from the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us, right? And then things should be collected responsibly and ethically. And so you can see here that there's multiple prongs to each aspect of the FAIR and the CARE principles. And the simple truth is that we don't always see that in archival projects, in digitization projects. One of the things that we heard from our focus groups when we were at Wooden Legs Library is don't do to us what was done to these other people, because under copyright law in the US, if you are the person doing the interview, you have equal intellectual property rights over that interview to the interviewee, which means that the interviewer can then go and basically say, okay, I have rights to sell this thing. I have rights to take this interview I've done in which I said I was going to be capturing your heritage for you and for your descendants and for your people for all time. But unless you want me to go put it out on the internet for everybody, even if it's very sacred, closed cultural knowledge, then you're going to have to pay me, right? So avoiding that kind of abuse is something that has not been done enough. And it's something that has really been kind of my whole animating purpose in being part of this project. And so there's a lot of ethical and legal concerns that have to be built into the process. And the FAIR and CARE principles are a good place to start for building that out. Now then, another challenge has been the lack of appropriate archival infrastructure from, I guess I would say, a Western perspective, because as anyone who's an archivist knows, we generate a lot of paperwork, we generate records about our records. There's a lot to be done to ensure that we can understand each record in its context for as long as it's needed to be available as trustworthy evidence of past acts and facts, right? So just pure physical infrastructure. You saw earlier the photograph of the Burns collection, and all of these really irreplaceable both records and other artifacts. They are currently in the basement of the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. Basements are a really bad place to keep paper records. They're prone to leaks. They tend to have relatively broad fluctuations in both temperature and humidity. They are not good long-term preservation environments. But there has not been enough resources put into the archival infrastructures in both tribal colleges like Chief Dull Knife and a lot of other low-resourced communities to ensure that there can be adequate physical infrastructure for the preservation. Workflows and training, there are no trained archivists yet at Chief Dull Knife. Adrienne has done an exceptional, admirable job training herself in archival principles and policies. But, the simple fact is that most tribal colleges have maybe a library or will have a library. They won't usually have the resources, again, for a full archival staff. And so developing accessible workflows and training that can be used especially to train student interns, and also developing those workflows and training in a way that respects the fact that the way we do archives is based on a European approach. That's where archival theory comes from, is the way that European countries managed records. And, of course, in the US, we've been kind of developing our own approach as well. But historically, there has not been archival workflows and training that are built around the kind of information governance that is inherent in, for example, the Northern Cheyenne governance of their information. And then policies and administrative infrastructure. If you want to ensure that information can be preserved for as long as it's needed, if you want to make sure that records are accessible for as long as they might be needed, you don't just have to have the place. You don't just have to have things put in the boxes and described correctly so that you can keep them in their context and understand them. You have to make sure that there's going to be policies that ensure that there's ongoing financial support, because if the building gets shut down, then or if if they can't pay the power bill, or if the wildfires come, or if there's floods, or all of the work is for naught. And so ensuring that there's the right policies, the right administrative support, and I have to say that, President Flying at this Chief Dull Knife College has just been a remarkable resource and support. But again, developing all of these infrastructures is a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of resources. And we are very fortunate to be able to work with such an amazing, dedicated team, as there is at Chief Dull Knife College. And just, but again, archival infrastructures are not something we can take for granted. And even if we can, what we typically will see are infrastructures that are based on settler colonial understandings of records that aren't necessarily applicable to any non-European based group. So digital infrastructure is difficult in some ways to differentiate from archival infrastructure because, of course, so many of our records nowadays are digital. And if we are going to be responsible stewards of our records, that means that we have to be responsible stewards of the digital. However, when it comes to the digital, there are unique challenges and problems that arise. For example, the available resources versus the ideal of open source. Because you think, at least, if you're naive like I was, you're like, oh, I know all the different open source things out there. We'll just set up an instance of this and then it will run beautifully. And then you realize that to actually set up the instance, you need someone who can run Linux. That's not me. I'm not a Linux server admin hobbyist or even naive. Right? And I'm someone with a literal PhD where I specialized in digital record keeping and archives, and I can't do it, right? So now we're asking these very low-resourced institutions to try to find solutions that will be accessible and available for as long as these records are needed. And we pretend that it's a very easy thing to do because there's open source solutions out there, right? But it's not that simple or that obvious. Finding someone who does Linux instances in Montana required, shaking every connection between myself, Adrian, John, just to try to find a consultancy that might be able to support them in that. And this is, again, a case where President Flying and the university have been incredibly supportive. Adrian has the IMLS resources and the SJSU resources, and still finding the resources to set up a trusted digital repository that meets the various standards has been incredibly challenging. And this is, I imagine, the case for any low-resourced archive out there. Then we have the question of appropriate metadata. So we've been using the SAA, Society of American Archivists, DAC standards. And there's a lot of work that's been needed to be done in the description. So, for example, the kinds of rights metadata that we need, the kind of rights description that these records need is far beyond what's typically imagined for most archival records and collections, because there are lots of community protocols regarding access that are not necessarily in place in most of your average Western archives, where we might say, okay, we'll just put this on an access restriction for 70 years or whatever the jurisdictional timeline is, because by that time the person will be dead, so no one cares. Not that that's necessarily right, even when it comes to settler communities, but that's the way it's long been done in most archival institutions. In this case, we are often dealing with closed information, even sacred information, that will never be appropriate to be shared outside of certain people, certain roles within the community. And so finding the appropriate level of description to make that happen, making sure that the metadata is actually accessible and describes things appropriately, especially when you're dealing with folks who are not members of the community, like me. Working on this process is it's something that requires ongoing listening, engagement, humility, and a real commitment to saying, okay, I know these things about archives, but the things I know are very much from this Western European perspective, right? So I can teach you what I know. I can share what I know about digital infrastructures, but also knowing that those infrastructures have a worldview built into them. Similarly, so part of that has been integrating the community into these processes. And so in our guidebook for the workflows, basically every few steps you see a big red triangle with an exclamation point that says stop. Do not share this description until you've consulted with TIPO and the Cultural Center to make sure that these are appropriate descriptions to be shared, right? And then finally, a lot of the work has been around supporting repatriation and access for both analog and digital materials. I mentioned earlier that there are countless indigenous artifacts, including Northern Cheyenne artifacts, that are currently being held in institutions where, let's be frank, they shouldn't be. And other ones where the institutions are happy to repatriate them, but there needs to be agreement within the community about how they'll be repatriated. The appropriate home within the community should go to TIPO, should go to the archives, it's set. And so making sure that there's processes in place where that when those records come home, when those audio cassettes come home, that they can be preserved and taken care of in a way where we'll have all of the infrastructure in place. For example, if they are digitized, that they can be accessible, and that the decisions, for example, decisions about do we clean the noise out or do we leave the noise in for audio recordings that are being digitized, right? All of these decisions are decisions that require community involvement and require the building in of the appropriate protocols, the appropriate controls, the appropriate legal controls. I keep saying the word controls, and that's because there has been a lot of, let's just say, lack of control with the way that indigenous digital heritage and tangible heritage have been treated historically. And so making sure that there are lots of controls and that the levers for those controls reside, in this case, within the Northern Cheyenne tribe, has been the focus of the work for me. And so then institutional infrastructure. So we've talked about the archives itself, we've talked about the digital archives, and then this all exists within broader institutions, right? And so when it comes to the law, the legal protections for indigenous digital heritage, native digital heritage are nowhere near where they should be. So our privacy laws, for example, see privacy as an individual right and something, at least in the US, that you can contract away. There is no idea in US law, like you see in European law, for example, where, you know, it might be a violation of someone's dignity. So even though they signed a contract, we're not going to let you publish that incredibly personal photo, for example. And so, but what's neither the US nor the Europeans, to at least in like the GDPR and the various EU data protection laws, neither of those cultures has a strong idea of communal privacy, at least legally speaking. And so that means that the institutions, for example, the college, the archives, the library, have to build those protections in, which means that IRB procedures, consents, all of these mechanisms for controlling access are of critical importance, because there is no backstop in the law to say that this is closed sacred knowledge, and though you can't go publish it on the internet, you random settler researcher, right? Like there's the legal recourse just isn't there in the way it needs to be. And so whether we're talking about songs, whether we're talking about scientific data, because there's a number of really active, wonderful, engaged Northern Cheyenne researchers out there producing lots of brilliant scholarship. And so then in those cases, of course, we're dealing with not just, questions of records, but then it's how do we support their data collection, then preservation and that sort of thing, right? And we aren't doing this well. Let's be really frank here. We have not been doing this well with really mainstream institutional knowledge. One of my favorite little memes basically says, we don't know where that information is anymore because the postdoc who collected it left to start a bakery. And that is much more true than we like to acknowledge. So building in institutional supports and protections to make sure that the data gets collected and appropriately described and that you have all of the workflows, but also that it's appropriately protected. So we have to make sure it's there and it can be shared, but it can only be shared with the right people. And so it's critically important to have that institutional infrastructure. And for new digitization projects, new collections, information governance, information sovereignty, data sovereignty should be built in from the beginning. It is so much easier to do it right up front than to try and tack it on at the end. Privacy by design is one of the best loved sets of privacy principles. And, the way Ann Kavukian says is, it needs to be there from the beginning. It's not a bolt on after. It's not a nice to have. It's fundamental to the way you build it. And it's the same way for ensuring that we have information governance and data governance and information and data sovereignty. They need to be built in from the beginning, and we need to make sure that we have the infrastructures, archival, digital, and institutional, that will help to ameliorate the current flaws in the way our systems work. And finally, all this has to be supported with solid information security or cybersecurity. And, it always seems like it's very, very straightforward. You've got privacy, you've got security, it's a nice little Venn diagram and they support each other. But the simple fact is that these are all really complex socio-technical systems, right? So privacy is not just about encrypting the right file that, at rest and in transit and making sure you have role-based access management. Privacy is a whole social system as well. For security, when we talk about the various cybersecurity risks, we have all of these things that most of us think about when we think about information security and cybersecurity. Is the network secure? Do you have physical security? You've made sure that you don't have a password username combo that's admin, right? But the biggest risks are almost always in what's sometimes called layers 8 and 9 of the stack, which is people and institutions. So the city of Toronto, if I recall correctly, got a huge hack. And the way the hackers got in is that they called a secretary at one of the front desks and basically said, hey, this is Mike Smith in accounting, picked a really generic name, and said, I need my login. This thing is due in 2 hours and I lost my login. And if I don't get in, my boss is going to kill me. And most people, we have natural human empathy. And so they were given the login, right? And then they were able to, hack the website and put on a dancing banana doing peanut butter jelly time, right? Now imagine they'd chosen to do much, much worse things with that kind of login. And so when we think about information security, and we're thinking about privacy, again, it's these really kind of almost infrastructural questions of, do we have good physical controls? So, I talked about how the Burns collection sits in the basement right now and it could leak and, and it's the institutions doing the best they can with what they have, right? But similarly, if we have access to the server without sufficient physical control, there's no point bothering to encrypt nothing, right? So you have to have all of these controls with information security. And then in the case of supporting indigenous digital sovereignty, cultural controls. We don't really have great models yet for this in terms of cybersecurity and information security, but it's something that we have to be thinking about and developing. And then there's the unique role of risk in protecting digital cultural heritage, because we often think of risk when it comes to information security in this very kind of quantified way, right? So in law school, they teach it as, learned hands calculus of risk. Basically, the risk of the thing times the damage the thing would cause is the amount of mitigation that a reasonable person should undertake. So if I have 100% chance of a thing happening that's going to cause $10 of damage, well, maybe I have to spend $10 to mitigate that thing. If I have a 1% chance of a thing happening that could cause $1 million, I can't do that kind of math in my head, but I'm not obligated to do huge interventions. But if I have like a 50% chance of a thing that's going to cause $10 million of damage, I probably need to put like $5 million. And that's the way we usually think about risk in cybersecurity and information security. But there's a lot of intangible risks. We're right back to the intangible things, especially when you're dealing with cultures whose traditional transmission has been purposefully disrupted by, let's be blunt, cultural genocide. The risk of losing control over any of that digital heritage, even though we can't necessarily plug it into Learned Ham's formula, it's a very real set of risks that we have to consider and make allowances for. So privacy isn't enough. Cybersecurity isn't enough. There's a need to fundamentally rethink our approach, and not just when it comes to supporting Indigenous archives, but really any sort of archival work that is, I would say, outside of your kind of traditional institutions. The digital has shown how fragile a lot of the things we traditionally depended on to protect information, things like, privacy through obscurity, which is the idea that, it's fine because these records are going to sit in a filing cabinet and, no one's really going to go bother to get a record unless they need it. We saw that get disrupted pretty early on in the analog world when a stalker went to the DMV and got the driver's abstract of the young actress he was stalking, was able to get her address, go to her apartment, and murder her. And that's when we begin to see, no, privacy through obscurity isn't enough. But now, of course, we live in a world where you can buy, reams of public records for pennies. And lots of private data brokers now have KGB level files on all of us. You might not have a Facebook, but I promise Facebook has a profile on you. And so rethinking with all of these risks and dangers, how we can actually both support the preservation of heritage, but do so in a way that doesn't further endanger communities that have been hugely surveilled and over-documented. It's an ongoing, this is the work of many careers and many lives. And I'm really grateful that Adrian and the team there at Wooden Legs and the Seeking Immortality team have given me the chance to be some small part of this work. And now I'm going to hand it over to our VR specialist to show us what the work looks like in that space.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about virtual reality, and we're going to demonstrate what we have so far. Definitely want to mention that we're not there yet, but we want to show you the different aspects of what we're thinking in terms of how we'd like Seeking Immortality to ultimately look like. The first thing is the use of photogrammetry to do motion capture of the nonverbals. So communication and language, as I'm using my hands, is very much nonverbal is a big part of that. And so what we want to do is do a good job of recording elders talking in the Northern Cheyenne language, telling stories, as well as other members of the tribe, and also gather and capture their nonverbals as well, so that we can turn those into realistic avatars. So what we're going to show you, the name of the room is called Acclaimed Euphoric Party, so forgive us. We're not making light of the topic, but the bottom line is what we want to show you is dancing robots that are synced to actual storytelling. And so we're going to show, we started with a test, which was essentially an interactive dance using motion caption technology. And so we want to show you that. And the ultimate goal is to, again, utilize this technology to record a dance, and definitely to record elders in speaking the Northern Cheyenne language and telling stories along with the nonverbals. So, Michelle, before we go, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I think a lot of communication really is put forward through nonverbal cues. And the example that we have here is a student that is recorded speaking Gaelic, which gives us the idea of what speaking in the native tongue might be like for the Northern Cheyenne. And the articulate movement that we're seeing in interactive dance is a student with, you will see the articulated joints and how the robot is able to move through the presentation. So let's go to the next slide. Dr. Chow?
Yeah, sure. So this kind of lays out the process. So you'll see, unfortunately, when we go into the live demo, that that room has some broken links, but this was when it was working completely. So you can see recording video of a dancing student. And I do think, Michelle, we do have a video of her on our website that we can possibly show as well. And then again, you can kind of see the motion detection using AI to connect movement and music and words with nonverbal. And then the third version, third aspect is 3D scanned artifacts. And so in this case, there was a basket where the advantage is that you can look at the basket, you can pick up the basket, and then you can look at it from a 360 point of view. So when we go to the room, one thing you'll notice is that we did not want to do anything Indigenous or Native American related, to be respectful. So these are all just different examples of motion. And so you can see the dancer there. And on our website, we have the actual young lady who is doing the dance. Quite impressive, actually. She was a graduate assistant that we just asked to do this. And you can see the nonverbals and capturing the dance. And again, we want to use the same technology to hopefully record some traditional dances along the way. So. And then is the basket there? I don't think the basket's there right now. Is it, Michelle?
I do not think so. Yes, I think that something's missing in the technical problems that we're currently having in the SJSU server instance with Mozilla Hub. So this is also a good lesson that we found that we are finding a few technical problems and hurdles that we are working through. And we are currently evaluating a few other platforms for immersive technology and virtual reality. We're looking at Frame VR as well as Spatial IO. And we are continuing to work through these technical difficulties. And we're making lots of progress with that, Dr. Chow. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are using something called Mozilla Hubs, which is a browser-based virtual reality environment, 3D virtual reality environment. Unfortunately, it looks like, and this is an example of how new this field is, the space, Mozilla, I think, is closing down their Hubs unit. And so I think Hubs is likely going to be going away. soon. However, there are several other types of technologies and companies, like Michelle said. So yeah, go back. Let's go look at the Gaelic speaker before we go to the next world. So if you just move forward to. Okay, and so this is the example of a young man speaking Gaelic. So he's not dancing, but again, you can see him using his hands. And when it is working, does that video work? You'll have a video of him talking. If you click on that, does that open a window, Michelle? Yeah, let's see what happens.
No, I'm not seeing that happen here.
It's not clickable. Okay. All right. Well, so you don't mean to role model technical difficulties. And before we leave, and so the last thing is that that individual, again, like Michelle and I are talking now, the recording is connected to his nonverbals, and so you can see he's telling a story in Gaelic. But before we leave, Michelle, can you take a whirl around the room just to kind of show people the 3D space, right? So again, the vision for this project is to situate historical artifacts along with stories and narrative in actual photos of the space itself, right? And so that's, again, one of the reasons why we're very excited about this technology. So, all right, with that being said,
Yes, and of
Michelle.
course, when we're working in these immersive spaces, you can really work on all the senses, working with audio, with the language, movement with dance. You can put in music, you can put in visual cues, 360 videos, 3D models, and other assets. So there's really multifocal points where we're dealing with all of the senses within these immersive learning environments, and
Exactly.
that makes a very powerful ecosystem for learning objectives and learning outcomes.
Exactly. And this type of technology can be used obviously for all communities. And so, yes, so let's go to the next. So Michelle has put together a nice demonstration of our own. So let's go to that slide, and you can talk about what you've done there, Michelle.
Okay, so basically for storyboarding the creative vision for Seeking Immortality, we are looking at ideas to bring in 360 videos of 2 presidents for the Northern Cheyenne to give a very personalized introduction to the space. We're looking also at drone footage to look at a very realistic overview of the arbor space and powwow grounds, as well as looking at digital preservation and looking at 3D models of various artifacts and personal belongings, which could include things like moccasins, intricate beadwork, basketry, and any number of things. So here, this is what we utilized was spatial I/O to build out a very basic prototype VR space. And from here, it allowed us to begin to storyboard ideas to share with the Northern Cheyenne so that it would serve as a catalyst for the tribe to begin making very important decisions about the types of information that we wish to include within these immersive environments. And some of the things that they articulated for us is that the important things they wish to communicate involve the land, stories, people, and artifacts. And as we realize that these things are really intertwined with the land, the people, the oral narratives, and the historic artifacts and personal belongings of how really intertwined they are with the land, with the people, with the Northern Cheyenne heritage. So the second image that we're looking at here is an overview from a drone footage of the Arbor powwow space. And within this environment, it gives us an opportunity where we might be able to show dance, music, something called hand games, which is an open, public, very fun game that we like to get involved with, and even the president really likes to get in and play with hand games.
She's very
There are
good.
various
Yeah.
crafts and also culture that we can try to put into these spaces. So
And
let's
so,
take a
Michelle,
look. Mhm.
and if we go, let's go back real quick. So the other part to this, as we mentioned previously, is user experience. And so this idea of storyboarding really helps us articulate what we believe we've heard from the users, and saves us from actually taking too many missteps in actual development. So what we've done, and the presidents have approved this mock-up, the storyboard, is making sure that we understand how to develop a space that they will find most useful and interesting. And so, as Michelle said, we have identified areas of information and experience that they actually would like to use. And so this certainly increases the likelihood of it being successful. And we just wanted to illustrate the science behind developing useful spaces. So. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. Yes. So this led to building a very rudimentary prototype within Spatial IO. And basically, we've situated this virtual reality space within land of Montana, understanding that sacred connection for the Northern Cheyenne with the land. This also allows us to utilize full body avatars, virtual avatars, and to also put into our space those articulated figures for movement, for dance, for speaking the native tongue in Northern Cheyenne. So our vision here is thinking about also maybe in time adding the element of artificial intelligence, which will allow these virtual avatars to be conversational agents. So that's something that we're also looking at on the horizon here. So also situated within the space, we can look at various renderings of 3D models. We see here a moccasin that we can take a closer look at. We can change the scale to any size that we wish. We can rotate that and take a look at it from all angles. We could also make this into a spherical portal so that we could delve into another virtual reality space where the participant and user could actually interact with these 3D artifacts. And really look at all the details inside the moccasin, underneath the moccasin, all of the beadwork and artistry that has gone into the presentation of the moccasin. And we might also be able to capture 360 videos of the artist at work in making these moccasins or baskets, or even the intricate beadwork that would go into the powwow space with the dance and the ceremonies that take place within that space. Dr. Chow, would you like to speak at all about a virtual reality space like Spatial IO, Frame VR, and Hubs?
Absolutely. So several things. When you look at this space, look at the difference between this and a 2D website. So, for example, if we could put, say, a video of this space on embedded on a web page, and that is a whole different experience. What I love about 3D environments is that it's very experiential, and you, as the information seeker, can experience information in a different way. And so I'm often asked why I am so enamored with 3D, and my response is always, when you think about it, a third dimension allows you to add another 33% of information or ways to communicate, right? And so what can we do with that? We can create beautiful spaces. So without the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, a 3D space is worth 1,000,000 words. I mean, look at the the geography there, the mountains in the background, what she's wearing. So the bottom line is, like we said earlier, nonverbal communications is a very big part of communication. And again, virtual reality can get us a little bit closer. And then lastly, as Michelle said, the technology is already there, although it is complex, where AI can connect with recordings of individuals and then make it conversational if that information is there, right? And so we're thinking that we will provide prompts maybe initially so that the avatar will be able to answer specific questions. So yes, it's the sky's the limit, literally. And again, I envision that this type of technology will be used to archive and preserve all of our stories, all of our traditions, so that future generations can hear and see and meet and learn from us. So,
And it
yeah,
also
Michelle.
allows you to develop a sense of community because we can have multiple avatars who are conversing with each other and sharing information and building that sense of community. Not all of the Northern Cheyenne actually reside on the reservation. So this
That's
also
right.
opens an opportunity to make presentations, to have special meetings, and to continue to build that sense of community for the Northern Cheyenne.
And the last thing I wanted to say is that we have to also emphasize the immortality part. And so what do we mean by that? Well, 3D scanning, just like a lot of different technology innovations, are getting more affordable and easy. And so I recently lost my father. My brother recently lost his dog. And so when we talk about immortalizing things, what we're really saying is we're able to approximate an individual or something else, like a pet, for example, or certainly a loved one, and then add whether it be recordings or movements so that you have an approximation. Because of course, losing a loved one or something you love is very painful, and having some memory. I guess you can look at this as a 3D photograph, right, Michelle? A 3D memory of that individual is just another nuance that's special. So.
Absolutely. That's a very wonderful point.
Okay, and then we've asked our consultant, Chuck Carter, to give us a little preview of what he's developing. So we don't have a whole lot there yet, but he's excited to share with you what he has so far.
Let's see if we can get this video to work. One moment.
This is a top view of the arbor in Reindeer, Montana. It's going to be part of a prototype VR demonstration, which will feature a number of Northern Cheyenne cultural and historical artifacts that you will be able to explore in your VR headset. It's based on a structure that's located just outside the city or the town, and each of these stalls will contain a wealth of information about the tribe and the area.
Yeah. And again, this gives you an example of, so just leave it there for a second, to have a visual of what the arbor looks like. And again, perfect example of, you can see this as a video, it's 2D, but the minute you go in and can look at different aspects and from all different angles, it is extra special. And we are planning on using 3D video as well, where you can move around in the video to watch participants or other things that we're videotaping from different perspectives. And that is just another nuance, 3D, a third dimension, that is going to become more and more the norm, and is very exciting to be able to. So for example, we hope to be able to do a dance and to be able to move around and look at the dancers from different perspectives. Again, I think is inordinately special, and this adds to the experience.
Hey, any closing remarks that you'd like to share with us, Dr. Chow?
Do we have any other slides? Or is that
Let's see. Yeah, we just have an image of sort of that drone aerial viewpoint of the powwow space. And that is something that goes on every year on July 4th. And there are lots of festivities and engagement with the community to really just shine and highlight the heritage of the Northern Cheyenne for all the community. So we're hoping to get more drone footage, and we are working on utilizing photogrammetry and LiDAR scanning to get very detailed views of the landscape and of the arbor space. And what we're able to do is to take all of those photogrammetry images and stitch them together to build something called a mesh, which allows us to sort of build a digital twin of the environment within immersive spaces. So we're really excited about bringing all of these amazing ideas into fruition within VR spaces, and the opportunity that it allows us to share the culture and heritage of the Northern Cheyenne.
Thank you, Michelle. So we appreciate again your time in watching our presentation.
Thank you very much.
As you can tell, this is a journey that's just beginning, not ending, but we're delighted that you've chosen to join us today to be a small part of that journey. You can see there's lots of QR codes as we go through the process. Everything we develop will be made available open source on our websites for your use. We, of course, welcome all of your feedback, your thoughts, your ideas, and we thank you again for the privilege to be with you today.